I don't know if it will take us the whole time today, but we are going to move forward with poetry. So I want to go ahead and let me see, go through the instructions on the Google Classroom a little bit. I always like to do updates just because we're only meeting once a week. So it's just good to touch base on some things when we do meet. Just a reminder that this is an A week. It's the third A week in a row because they're equalizing the A versus B days, but next week will be B again. So you can go back to that. Oh, there's still people coming in. I have to mark everybody off. So what that means is that you've got a formative today and another one on Friday. So, and then next week you'll just have it on Monday and Wednesday because it will be a B week again next week.
I didn't know last week was an A week, so I missed the formative.
Oh, well, you should have emailed me.
It's my fault. It's okay.
All right, well, that's why I try to do updates, you know. But a lot of stuff's happening right now, and I get the feeling, y'all can correct me if I'm wrong, but I get the feeling that like every teacher's doing it differently. So like some people are giving you an assignment that day that's due that day, and then another assignment on Friday that's due that day, and other people like me are saying, okay, get this done sometime this week. I don't know. I feel like I'm trying to make decisions that make it easier for you, like long window due dates and stuff like that. Like I'm not trying to make you busy on the weekends by putting the deadlines there. I'm just trying to make it so that you have the biggest possible window to do assignments, because how frustrating if you think you're going to work on something today, but then somebody sends you a pile of work to do right now. I don't get how frustrating that would be. That would be super frustrating to me. So I'm trying to be flexible in that way. Hopefully y'all can let me know if I'm not. If you feel comfortable, hopefully enough to just send me an email and say, that deadline's crazy because we've got 5 projects in this other class or whatever. I don't know. Let me know. I'm hoping that I'm doing it okay. Okay, senior stuff. I always like to bring that up because there are some seniors in class. So you should be working on your Apply Texas and your FAFSA. Next Wednesday, put it on your calendar, seniors. Next Wednesday, the 21st, during our class time, the counselors are going to be here to go through and help you with FAFSA. So if you have yet to get started, if you started and you got stuck or you have questions, they're going to be here just like they were for Apply Texas, and they're going to go through the FAFSA process with you during this class time on Wednesday, which is an asynchronous day. We're not going to have class on Wednesday next week. We'll have it on Monday as usual, but the counselors are coming on Wednesday. So I'll remind you like the night before. I have to make a new Zoom link, so I'll send that link out to you the night before just to remind you. Also, reminder that your yearbook pictures will be taken next week, seniors, on Thursday and Friday. You should be receiving an email about your time. I think they're doing it sort of alphabetically. So if you haven't received an email, give it till Friday, and this Friday. And if you still don't have an email by Monday, then I would try to contact Mrs. Garcia over at school. She's the yearbook teacher. So you can, if you don't know her email, you can email me and I'll send it to you, but it's kind of a strange email. Anyway, so those are specific times. They're doing it in the choir room. So you're going to arrive in whatever outfit you want to have your picture in, and then they will likely, and in the past, what they've done is they have then had people change into the, after they do that first picture, then they do the pictures with the drapes. So like the bow tie thing for the guys and the drape for the girls. I don't know if they're doing that this time or not. I don't know if that's a safe thing to do or not, but that's a possibility. So you're supposed to arrive at your time with a mask, and then you'll take your mask off for your picture, obviously. And then you can leave when you're done with your picture. There's nothing else happening on campus. So check your email for that. Last thing is on updates is a reminder that we had some assignments that were turned in last week. You should have completed the poetry quiz. Some people did not do it, and it closed on Friday. That's the thing about formative. I can set the time for it to close. So you have to make sure that you hit those deadlines. I'm trying to remind you by putting an assignment also in the Google Classroom so that when you sign in, it's there on that little tile and it tells you what to do that day. So I'm trying to keep up with those things. The poetry quizzes were okay, but some people struggled with them. I was looking at the results for those quizzes, and that information is important to know. I need to know that you know that information. It's just stuff from the textbook. It should be right in your notes. There's nothing in there that, I mean, I took all the questions directly from the textbook. So I want to offer you an opportunity to re-quiz if you didn't take the quiz the first time around, or if you are not happy with your score from the first time around, you can re-quiz. It's on formative. I made a new quiz. I don't know how it is when you sign in, but when, I'll just show you on my master thing here. So there's the original quiz. It's going to have a check mark next to it. That one's closed. You can't get into that. That's the first one. But I made a new quiz here, and that's the one. It's going to open a little bit later on today, and it will be open through, I think, did I put Saturday, I think? I put it down here. Yeah, Saturday the 16th at night, at the end of the day. So if you would like to re-quiz, you can go back and do that, but this is the last re-quiz. So study, look over your notes, look over your book. It's pages 107 to 111. And like I said, I took all the questions right from the book. I literally just, you know, like copied what the book said. I put it in a different format because it's got, you know, some multiple choice and some clicking things. Pay attention to directions and things like that. But you do have that opportunity. So it's closed right now. It's going to open, I think, 3 o'clock today, a little bit later on today. I think I put it in here what time it was going to open. Yeah, later today it will open, and then you have until Saturday. But that is optional. If you want to keep your grade from the first quiz, then that's fine. If you didn't do the first one, I would highly encourage you to do the second one because that will give you a grade for it. If your grade for the second one is better than the first one, then obviously I will replace your first grade with the new one. If your grade for some reason is not as good, I don't think it should be because you're going to do a little extra studying. But if it is worse, then I'll just keep the better of the two grades. But I'm hoping that if you look into how the first quiz was, you can kind of think, okay, well, I'll study those things. These are probably also important for the re-quiz, and then you can just do that and your grade will improve. So I'll take the highest of the two grades. Any questions on that re-quiz situation? Okay, all that background stuff is important for you to know because I'm going to be expecting you to use that terminology. We're going to use a lot of it today as we start to get into poetry and to be able to use the language of poetry. So that's really, those pages were just background information on how we talk about poems, the terms that we use, and we need to have that common vocabulary. So that quiz is important. The other assignment that you should have turned in last week is the speaker and structure analysis for Ode to a Texas Porch. Did you like that poem?
It was interesting.
Yeah, it was interesting. Ode to a Texas Porch. I feel like we could all identify with that Texas porch because we all know what happens when the sun beats down on something for ages. And we've all had things in our backyard that fall apart because of the rusty nails and the, you know, dilapidated wood and all that stuff. So I'm going to work with that poem a little bit today because I want to show you a technique for analyzing poetry that will help you and help you get into a poem. And also the assignment this week is to do that specific procedure. I call it 1, 2, 3 analysis. So I'm going to demo that today on that poem so that you can kind of see how that 1, 2, 3 analysis will get you completely through a poem down to what, you know, the meaning of the poem and so on. So hold still for a minute and I'll get to that. But you should have turned in that speaker and structure analysis. I was looking through them. I haven't graded them yet, but I was looking through them and I did notice that most people did very well with the speaker. They were able to characterize the speaker in the poem. He was probably the poet. It isn't always the poet, but in this case, I think it probably is. Structure gave people some trouble. So I'm going to highlight that today and talk about structure specifically, because I think that some people didn't know what to do, so they just started writing about imagery and other things like that that are not based in structure. So today I'm going to highlight structure so that those of you who might have been a little iffy on what we mean by poetic structure will get some support and some ideas today to help you with that. Let me go through the assignments for this week, and then I'll go back and I'll do that 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. It's going to take me a while because I'm going to be teaching it to you. So it's something that might not take you that long when you're doing it, but because I'm going to be teaching it and modeling it for you, it might take a little while. So let me do these assignments down here, and then I'll jump back up to the lesson. So just a reminder that we have formatives, 2 of them this week. Retake the poetry quiz is optional. If you do it before Saturday, then you have the option to improve your grade on it because that information is important. There are 2 videos that I want you to watch. They're here. I put everything as an assignment. I hope this isn't annoying to you, but I put everything as an assignment because I figure then it will show up on this page over here. You can let me know if it's annoying, but then it shows up over here and you remember to do it because I'm assuming that when you sign in, you look at your array of tiles to figure out whatever says due today, make sure that's done, that kind of thing. So if I put it on the assignment as an assignment, even if it's not technically an assignment, like I'm not grading you watching videos. I could make questions, but I just want you to watch the videos, right? They're going to help you with your interpretation of poetry in general. And they're both short. They're like, I don't know, 9 minutes for both of them. But I do put everything as an assignment. So you have the option to go in and just mark it done. You don't have to turn anything in. If you have to turn something in, it will say so in the instructions. Like I'll put some instructions here and it will say how to turn it in. Or if it's a document, obviously you have to do it and turn that in. But I'm just thinking it's a placeholder and it's helpful for organization. But anyway, where was I in the assignments? So there are 2 videos to watch. One is called The Pleasure of Poetic Pattern, and that will talk a little bit about structure. So I'm going to talk about structure today, but then that little 4-minute video will also kind of give you some ideas about poetic structure. And then also watch The Art of the Metaphor, which is about comparison. Oh, hold on a second. What's going to bother me? Does stuff like this bother you? I don't know. I'm a recovering perfectionist. All right, so that's one assignment. And then the last one, the one that you will be turning in by, I think I put it for Sunday. Again, I'm not expecting you to work on Sunday. If you get it done on Friday or Thursday or whenever, that's fine. If you can't work on the weekends, that's fine. Is a 1, 2, 3 analysis for a new poem. So the new poem that I want you to look at on your own this week is called The Inheritance. And I want for you to use the process that I'm about to demo for you to work through that poem. And I want you to be able to turn in your notes, your annotations that you do on that poem. So there are 2 different ways that you can do that. And it depends on what your setup is at home or what you prefer. If you want to, I made a typed version. That's this Google Doc one here. If you want to, you can just do this one online, and I put a column. This is gonna make more sense to you when I go through the different steps of the 1, 2, 3 analysis. But here's the poem in the middle, and then there's a spot for you to just type in your notes. You can make them colors if you want or whatever. And then at the bottom is the step 3. There's 3 steps to the 1, 2, 3 analysis. So if you want to type it, then you can just turn it in. So that one will make a copy for you and you can turn it in as usual. Some people prefer instead to get out their markers and they want a piece of paper that they can, make all their notes and all their connections and all their lines to. And if that's the case, then I did also just make a PDF of the poem. So if you have a printer at home and you want to print it out, it's not a requirement, but if you want to print it out, then you can just print it and then you can use all your scented markers and all your colors and all your markers and your highlighters and all that stuff. And then to submit it, you would just take a picture and submit the picture. So you have the option of whatever works best for you. I don't know. Those are the only 2 options I could think of to make it workable for you. If we were in class, I would just print out the poem and give you a copy of it, and everybody would do it on paper, but we don't have that option. I don't think everybody has a printer. So, I mean, some people just don't have them. It's normal nowadays to not have a printer, so you can do it either way. So that's the assignments for this week. The quiz, if you want, well, the formatives, the quiz, the videos, and the analysis. Questions on those before I switch over to my document camera? You can put it in the chat if you want, or you can unmute. I saw a funny t-shirt, by the way. Should I tell you? That's sort of off topic. We're in a Zoom meeting, it goes. It was a t-shirt and it said, "You're on mute." And I thought, that is good on so many levels, because it's sort of like me saying, I don't want to talk to you right now. Like, I'm putting you on mute. Or it's also like the thing that we say a million times in Zoom calls when somebody's talking, but they forgot that they were muted. Sign of the times, I guess. I don't know, maybe I need that t-shirt. All right, I don't see any questions on the assignment, so I'm gonna go back up to the lesson. And what I wanna do is switch over to my document camera, and I want to walk you through the steps of a 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. So that's the thing that you're gonna need to do on the new poem this week. I'm not gonna do it on that poem. I'm going to do it on the porch poem, because you're already familiar with the porch poem. So I think that it's a good one to do with the demo, because already you've read it, you're sort of familiar with that poem and certain aspects of it. So I'm gonna do what I want you to do for your assignment here on a demo for you. But let me switch over to my camera. I just have to change the settings and switch to the document camera. Okay. All right. Super techie. Okay. All right, I'm gonna move this over. So I want to first talk about what the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis is, because I developed it to make it easier for students to practice poetry analysis. You might want to jot this down in your notebook, but you'll also have access to this video later, so you can go back through and watch this portion if you want, or maybe I'll just excerpt this part out and you can just, like as an example, always have it. But let's, in your notebook or whatever, let's just label this the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. There are all kinds of different methods that you can use to get into a poem, but the whole focus is, let's, unpack this poem and let's think about all the things that are happening in it so that we can finally get to the meaning of the poem or what the poet is trying to say. There are lots of ways to do that. This is the way that I think it helps students. So we're going to practice it a little bit, but ultimately, whatever way works for you when you're taking the AP exam, or say your semester exam, whatever, is what you need to do for yourself. So the 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis sounds simple, right? 1, 2, 3 sounds simple. There are 3 times that you're going to read the poem. That's why it's called 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. The first time that we read it for the basics. We're looking at things like the title. We're kind of speculating about the title. We're going to look up vocab, maybe other allusions or references, because in a poem, every little word is significant. And if I skip over too many words, then I'm just hindering myself from understanding the poem completely, because there's always those little blackout spots that aren't clear to me. So you have to stop and look up vocab. If they reference a Greek god and there's no footnote, if they talk about some location or some war or something like that that I'm unfamiliar with, I have to go Wikipedia that real quick and just see what it is so that I can understand. I mean, if a relationship in a poem is being compared to a battle, in Europe during World War I kind of have to look up that battle and just see what that's about. So I have to do that basic stuff. I also want to think about the speaker, just like you did on your assignment for this past week. Who is the speaker? Like, is it a first person speaker, third person? You know, what's going on here with the speaker? I want to think about the topics. Oh, this poem is about a porch. Oh, this poem is about love. Oh, this poem is about hatred. Like, whatever the topics are of the poem, just in general. And then the last thing I'm going to look at is the basic structure of the poem. You know, how's it broken up into stanzas? How many lines? All that good stuff. All right, so that's the first reading of the poem, is I read it and then I go back and I do these sorts of things just to start getting my feet wet in the poem and start to understand the basics of it. Step 2 is where we go into the figurative parts of the poem. So when we look at poetry, there are the things that are literal, that are meant exactly as they're stated. And then there are the things that are figurative. They're not meant the way that they're stated. So when I say hit the road, I don't mean that literally. I mean, let's get in the car and go. So those are figurative type statements. These are your metaphors, right? Your personification and similes are types of metaphors. Same thing with conceit. So there are sub types of metaphors, but you know, as long as you say metaphor, you're good. Also, symbols. If I start noticing that there's a symbol, there's comparisons. I also think here about word connotation. That was in your reading on those pages 107 to 111. Word connotation are the associations that we make with a word. By that we mean kind of like, I know that if I take the word, dad, right? I know that that means a male parent. But there are connotations with the word dad. Dad makes it sort of a warm title. If I called my dad dad, it means that we probably have a warm relationship. We're probably comfortable with each other. If I called my dad father, well, that's still a male parent, but it carries a different connotation. It makes it seem like the relationship is distant or like not friendly. Or if I called my dad pops, that's sort of a, you know, down home kind of dad's my homie sort of relationship. So the connotation has to do with which word is chosen to depict that idea. And when poetry, every word is purposeful. So dad is like my example of that. If you put that there on your notes, then you'll remember that this is a male parent. That's the definition. But the word that I choose to describe male parent tells me more about the relationship. What about daddy? Right? Pops. What if I call my dad daddy and I'm 52 years old? Kind of juvenile. Or maybe I'm one of those, you know, like carrying my chihuahua in my purse, fluffy people, right? Like daddy's gonna pay for everything. I don't know. So you can see how just with those different names for the same thing, I can create a connotation. All right. So in the poetry analysis, then I want to start looking, not every word has that kind of element, but I want to look at keywords that do that, connotative words. What else with figurative language? I want to look at imagery. And the main thing here is that I want to look for the effects of these things. I'm not just looking to point out, oh, here's a metaphor, oh, here's some imagery. I have to start thinking to myself, why is this metaphor here? Why are these two things being compared? Why is this relationship being compared to the tides? Or why is this moment that's being described in this poem being compared to a sunrise? So I have to think about the effects of those figurative elements. So it's not just a hunting expedition in the poem, it's a thinking expedition in the poem, if that makes sense. And so I have to do all that work in step two. Step two is probably the heavy lifting of the work that it takes to look at a poem. All right, so now I've looked at the poem twice. The third time I read it, now I need to look for meaning. If I've done enough analysis in step one and step two, now I'm looking for what does the poem mean? So what's the significance of the poem? And what is the poet trying to say to me as a reader? What am I supposed to take of this poem as a human being? So we're looking for, how does this reflect the human experience? And the way we do that in literature is to look at the theme. Right, because the theme is that statement of the life lesson. I'm going to tell you a trick, because this is the part that's most mystifying to students, I think. They can usually do all this other stuff. I can find all these things. I can label it with my scented markers and all that, all my colors and all that stuff. But then when I say, okay, so what is the point that the poet's trying to make? So there's a big jump between level 2 and level 3 reading. And I'm going to give you the bridge that will help you get there. And it's to think about the topics of the poem. So to get to this life lesson about the human experience, this philosophical observation that's in the poem, I can think about topics. I want to list all the things that this poem is about. This poem is about hatred. This poem is about anger. This is just an example, right? This poem is about forgiveness. Any decent poem will be about a multitude of things. There's more than 2. But I would not use the topic of life. People will try to do that sometimes, and I'm like, well, what poem isn't about life? You need to try to be a little specific. Try to narrow it down, right? Try to get to something, right? And then from the topics, I think to myself and I ask myself this question: what is the poet trying to tell us about the topic? Whatever topic you want. So if I felt like the poem was really heavily about forgiveness, and that's like, the other things are there, but the really most prominent topic is forgiveness, then I would ask myself, what is the poet trying to tell us or teach us about forgiveness? My answer to that question is the theme. So if you get to the point where you're trying to figure out the meaning in step 3, and it's just not coming to you, it's not coming together, you should not use a cliche. Like, you shouldn't say, oh, an apple a day keeps the doctor away, you know, that sort of thing. You want to make sure that you're focusing on what the poem is actually saying. Then try this trick. Just make a little list for yourself of all the topics, and then ask yourself, what is the poet trying to tell us about, fill in the blank of whichever topic seems most relevant to the poem. And then when you can name what the poet's trying to teach us through that poem, then you've got the meaning of the poem. And it should reflect human experience, not just the poem itself, right? Like, don't sit on porches is not what Ode to a Texas Porch is trying to teach us. Porches can be dangerous. You know, like, that's not something that we all need to learn. So this is going to be more philosophical, right? So those are the 3 steps, and you have to read the poem in between. So the first time you read it, it's just a cold reading. The second time you read it, you figured a few things out. The vocabulary will help you in the second reading because you've already looked up the words that you don't know. The next time you read it, you start looking for the deeper meaning in the elements in the poem. And if you do a good enough job with 1 and 2, then it should lead you to 3. If you get to step 3 and you can't come up with this theme or this life lesson in the poem, or you can't list any topics, then it means you have to go back and do more work with steps 1 and 2. Like you have to go back and do more analysis of those things. And then eventually you'll get this. All right, does that make sense? Who has a question for me about the 1, 2, 3 analysis? Because I know it's a lot. We're gonna practice it this week. And I'm gonna do a demo on that poem in a minute for anybody who wants to stick around and watch it. But is there anything on the 3 steps that you want me to talk about in more depth? Anybody?
Miss, can you show more of the first part? I didn't get the first part.
Mm-hmm. So the first part is just about noticing the things that you can kind of see right off the bat with the poem. Titles, people skip them. And titles, poets, when they think about titles, very often are giving you the key to open the poem in the title. Sometimes people look at this Ode to a Texas Porch, they skip the title and they just read it and they get way off on the interpretation of the poem. But he told you the topic at the beginning, right? This poet told you this is going to be an ode, and I asked you to look up ode, which you should have done on the assignment. An ode is like a praise of something in an emotional way. And so he's going to be praising a porch. And if I think about that, even in step 1, I'm like, who cares about a porch? Like, why would you praise a porch? That's a dumb thing to praise, and it doesn't make sense. But I'm going to keep it in the back of my mind, because why would he title it that if it wasn't significant in some way? So looking at those basic things and just sort of like in a preliminary way, starting, this is like your gateway into the poem. I'm going to go through all these steps right now in a poem. If you have time to stick around, then you can. If you don't have time to stick around, then you can go and I'll post the video later of it that you can watch. But this is going to help you with your homework, because this is exactly what I want you to do with the new poem called The Inheritance that you're going to look at this week. I'm just giving you a model of how to do that. Okay, hopefully you got that. Any other, I'm going to change this out. So are there any other sections that you want me to spend a little more time talking about before I do the demonstration? No? Okay, well, keep that by your side, because you're going to see me go through those steps. I'll probably throw this back up there a couple of times. Running out of space. Okay, so let's do a practice 1, 2, 3 analysis with this poem that you're already familiar with. So step 1, the basics. Let me read the poem, and maybe it's been a little while since you looked at it, but I'm going to read it. Plus, poetry has that musical quality that we want to hear. So I'm going to read it, and then I'm going to do step 1. Then I'll read it again, and I'll do step 3. Then I'll read it a third time and do step 2. Then I'll read it a third time and do step 3. So this is going to take a little while. I understand that, you know, I'm trying to really do it from its complete quality. So if you want to go back and watch this later, I'm going to have it available for you as you're working on your homework 1, but it does take me a while to go through all the stages when I'm explaining everything, but hopefully it will help you. So the poem is Ode to a Texas Porch by Esteban Rodriguez. Rain-starved, sun-warped, porous and unsteady. You moan when the wind proselytizes hints of another season, spring, winter, front yard barbecues, holidays ripe with decorations. Potted plants line your splintered edges. Rusted nails peek from your rotted crevices. And yet, Despite your crooked columns, your sunken steps, the whole of you refusing to believe in gravity's tenets, you're an altar for my father's work boots, for my mother's huaraches, for Sunday morning shadows armed with Spanish verses, pamphlets. Evenings, I claim your corners, sit and gaze at the darkness you breathe, feel it graze the ashen bottoms of my feet. And as it seeps across the yard, burrows beneath patches of parched Bermuda grass, a pack of strays, scarred with mange, haloed with fleas, begin squeezing between your fractured cinder blocks, the way I squeeze when a ball wanders off and I must squirm after it, crawl into a space filled with broken pipes, shattered glass, toy trucks, and mangled plastic bags, and if deep enough, matted hide and bones, as though these creatures knew when they knew the earth would offer no other place to go. All right, so step one is going to be title, right? I know that an ode is speaking like a praise. So in this case, he's praising a porch with emotion. And I already said that when I think about a porch, I don't think about praising a porch. Good porch, good job, porch. So that's weird. But I'm going to keep it in my mind because there's got to be something to that. Why would you call it an ode if there wasn't some sort of praise involved in the treatment of the porch in the poem? And it might help me get to the meaning of it. Another thing I want to do is I want to look up words that I don't know. You have to do it. I know you don't like to do it, but just think about this. At least you have the internet. Think about your poor parents who had to use dictionaries, right? Like go to the shelf and get the dictionary. So I don't know what words you might need to look up here. I'm going to guess at a few and I'll be your dictionary today, but probably you already looked these up when you were working with the poem last week. Porous, proselytizes, maybe tenants, maybe huaraches. If you didn't know Spanish, you might have to look that up, right? Pamphlets, parched, Bermuda grass. I know what grass is, but I don't know what they mean by Bermuda grass. I might have to look that up. Mange, matted. I might know that or I might not. So now I'm going to look up all those words. It's just one of those necessities. We'll just go ahead and put them in because I will define them for you. Porous, of course, that's a science word. It means with holes. So that's where they're describing the sort of like the wood that's used to create the porch. It's porous. And proselytizes means like sort of like predicts in a religious way. Like portend. That's another thesaurus word to describe a thesaurus word doesn't help us. But here the wind is sort of predicting another season. Well, you can kind of tell when the seasons are shifting. I just said a little while ago, well, it was really foggy out yesterday and today, and that is sort of like a season changer around here. So it's sort of like the weather giving you a hint at the future. Can you see how every time I do a vocabulary word, I'm kind of trying to relate it to the sentence that it's in? I'm trying to settle in my understanding of how that word's being used. Tenets, a tenet is like a rule. So here is a refusing to believe in gravity's tenets. So the rules, somebody is going against the rules of gravity or not believing in them. Huaraches are like sandals. Pamphlets are like folded info leaflets, right? Parched means thirsty. It's sort of like beyond thirsty, like parched is the next level thirsty. And then Bermuda grass is a certain kind of grass that grows mainly in like hot climates. If we tried to grow grass that grows in Minnesota here in South Texas, it would never make it. It would just come up out of the ground and go and like collapse back down onto the dirt. But especially if it had to stay up for, I don't know, like 6 months, like our summers here. So there's specially developed grass that's for the South. Well, we're in Texas, right? The title told us that. So that makes sense. Okay. Mange. Mange is like a scabby skin disease that we see in animals. Gross. What else did I highlight? Matted. Matted is like tangled. So much, it's so tangled that it formed a mass. Like if you ever had to comb your dog or your cat and there's a part of their hair that something got in it or they laid on it a certain way and it just all sort of interwove, that's matted. So tangled to form a mass. Here the description says, this is when he's under the porch. If deep enough, matted hide and bones. So this is like the remains of a creature underneath the porch there. So I'm not just defining, I'm taking those definitions and trying to like associate them with the description that's happening in the sentences and in the lines. All right. Another thing that I want to do when I'm in stage 1 is I want to think about the point of view. So the point of view in this poem, the speaker, I know is a first person speaker. How do I know that? Anybody?
He uses words like my and stuff.
Yeah, there's down here we have my father's, right? My mother's. Also you. So it's a first person speaker, but they're speaking to a porch. Okay, that's not normal. There's a term for that in literature analysis, and that's called apostrophe. It's totally different than the little, punctuation mark. So apostrophe is when somebody, some speaker in a poem or some narrator is speaking to something that can't answer back because it's an element of nature or, like a thing, not another person. So if a speaker is addressing the sky or the sun, or in this case, a porch, the porch is not going to answer back. So we call that apostrophe. That's just a little side note there. For those of you who will see examples of that on your poetry test and maybe go with it, right? So when I think about the speaker, I can see that he's speaking to the porch because of you, right? Now for now, I just want to notice that. I like to draw lines to things. It helps me visually connect things, but like when you're working on yours, you can do it whatever way makes sense to you. You don't have to do the way that you write it on the paper or make your notes is up to you. The 1, 2, 3 steps I want to see though. All right, another thing I want to look at this stage is any kind of like basic structure. So I know people struggled with structure a little bit when we were doing our assignment last week, and that's normal. It's a school, we're all learning, it's okay. But when we're talking about structure, we're looking at sentences, we're looking at paragraphs, we're looking at stanzas and lines. And when you get a poem like this that's all one big stanza and not broken up into sections that are handy, at the level 1 point, one thing that you can do is you can look at sentences, right? And you can look for structure by saying, okay, let me see where the sentences begin and end. Because in this poem especially, it's pretty interesting. What is this thing up here? Oh, go away. It will go away on its own, right? So if I look at the sentence length, everywhere where there's a period, I'm just going to put a little hash mark right here. Because there's two sentences, sort of, right here in the first line. That's really, really short sentences. I'll do this later. Why are you bothering me? I'm doing 1, 2, 3 poetry analysis. I don't want to upgrade now. Go away. I'm just going to cover it up. Okay. The next sentence ends on the next line. So the next sentence is 1 line long. Then the next one ends here with decorations, edges, crevices. So these are all pretty short sentences. There's one longer one in here, but wait until you see what happens at the end of the poem that you didn't notice before. And yet, despite down here, pamphlets. Okay, do you see how that just got longer? This is from here to here is a much longer sentence than these little ones that were up here. And then where does the next sentence end? Here. So just on a basic level, I can see that the structure of this poem is such that the beginning has short little sentences, and then it gives way to longer sort of sweeping explanations and descriptions of the scene. So just on a basic level, I could say that the poem is structured in that way, with short sentences followed by longer and longer sentences until, I mean, like half the poem right here is one sentence from beginning to end down there. What does that have to do with what the poem means? I don't know yet, but I'm just exploring all of the things that are happening in the poem so that anything that comes up as I'm trying to figure out the meaning will be obvious to me. Now, before I move on to phase 2, I want to think about some topics. Usually I just sort of list them over here on the side, but if you want to mark them where they are, then you can do that too. This thing is supposed to be on don't bother me mode. Oh, computers. Well, obviously we could say literally the poem is about a porch. I don't know if you could say much philosophically about the human experience through saying that it's about a concrete thing like a porch. Usually we want to get to something abstract. So let's just start with it's about a porch. It's about a porch, but it's also about the speaker's interaction with the porch, which it seems like he likes the porch, right? It seems like he is praising the porch. There's a description of his interaction with it, especially in the second half of the poem in this long sentence. He talks about how he gets up under the porch because he has to go and get a ball that's gone under there, and there's dogs that are under there. So in a way, it's almost like, I don't know, sort of like a darkness. Up here, though, it's all about the sun. So maybe there's like a weird dark light thing happening in this poem a little bit. Right now, it's just my first reading. So really, this is sort of speculation. I'm just putting my ideas down to see where they connect up later on step 2. Last thing I can do is look for a shift, and I did find one. Sometimes the shift will be obvious because the poet will like make a break and they'll be like stanza 1, stanza 2. Well, pretty obviously there's a shift between stanza 1 and stanza 2. But sometimes it's not as obvious. Like right here, there is a shift. Right? There's a shift in the sentence because here's the end of that first longer sentence, and here's the beginning of that really long sentence that ends the poem. So there's a shift. I want to make a note. I usually like to draw a line across wherever I see a shift. There can be more than one shift in a poem. In this case, I really only see one. I want to say that the shift has to do with the sentences, right? He's kind of giving us a hint, this poet, that there's a shift here because there's all these multiple sentences up here and then this change for one big sentence at the bottom. So the sentence structure shifts completely at that stage. But also what's shifting is the time of day, right? Up here we have the sun warped aspects, the rotting, porch, the description of what's on the porch, and then all of a sudden we shift to evening. So we could also say that it shifts from probably daytime. I mean, people are coming to visit with their pamphlets and stuff, to evening. Do I know if that's going to be significant later? No, I don't, but I'm noticing that. So I want to write down whatever I notice so that it can feed into maybe a better understanding of the poem in stage 2. All right. So hopefully that gives you a little more background on structure and also how to do step 1. I'll put this paper up on the Google Classroom when we're done. Well, there's gonna be more than one paper. All right, let's move on to step 2. Remember that the second reading of the poem, I've already figured some of this stuff out. I don't know how it works yet, but I want to read it a second time and I want to think about the figurative level. Okay, so why spend all your time writing about a porch, and especially a poem of praise? What's so great about a porch? And I want to start looking into that because that figurative element isn't obvious to me in my first reading of the poem. So I want to start thinking about the symbols and the metaphors and the effects of those things on the poem. So I'm going to label this one. I have a different pen that I wanted to use. This is the second reading of the poem. Now, when you're doing your paper, you can just put it all on one paper. I just think that when I'm making the notes, it gets harder and harder to read it with all my little scribbles and lines and stuff. So I'm just starting with a fresh one here. So I'm going to read it again, thinking, okay, I figured out a few things about this poem. I just need to go a little deeper. Ode to a Texas Porch. Rain-starved, sun-warped, porous and unsteady. You moan when the wind proselytizes hints of another season, spring, winter, front yard barbecues, holidays ripe with decorations. Potted plants line your splintered edges. Rusted nails peek from your rotted crevices. And yet, despite your crooked columns, your sunken steps, the whole of you refusing to believe in gravity's tenets, you're an altar for my father's work boots, for my mother's huaraches, for Sunday morning shadows armed with Spanish verses, pamphlets. Evenings, I claim your corners, sit and gaze at the darkness you breathe, feel it graze the ashen bottoms of my feet, and as it seeps across the yard, burrows beneath patches of parched Bermuda grass, a pack of strays, scarred with mange, haloed with fleas, begins squeezing between your fractured cinder blocks, the way I squeeze when a ball wanders off and I must squirm after it. Crawl into a space filled with broken pipes, shattered glass, toy trucks, and mangled plastic bags, and if, deep enough, matted hide and bones, as though these creatures knew when they knew the earth would offer no other place to go. All right, so now I start thinking about the figurative aspects of the poem. I'm going to start thinking about the metaphors. I think there are a couple of metaphors in this poem, but the strongest and most common element that's figurative here, well, there's two of them. There's personification, aplenty, right? Like starved, what else? Moan, the porch is moaning, the wind is proselytizing, refusing is a human quality, belief is a human quality that's being associated with the porch. What else? Breathing. So there's a lot of personification. I want to start thinking about the words that are being used to personify the porch. And in one place, it's not the porch, it's the wind right here. So I want to start thinking about the ones that are being used and sort of like the qualities of those words. I want you to steer away from it's a positive or negative. That's a starting point, but that's not an ending point. But if I look at the words starved, moan, refusing, believe, and breathe, that sounds pretty like the basic human functions. Well, except refusing. Starving, like eating, moaning, breathing, a lot of that is sort of like the basic functions of humans, right? Just gonna make a note about that. Belief. I'm also noticing that the imagery pretty much stops, I mean, the personification pretty much stops right here. After that, imagery is the main feature of the second half of the poem. So let's make some notes about that. And then we'll talk about the metaphors. So the first imagery that we have right here is the imagery of the porch and its like visual elements. It's rain-starved, sun-warped, porous and unsteady. It's like old and unsafe. I mean, a porch that's unsteady is not going to be solid underneath your feet. There's a description also of the wind moaning, but then there's a description of the seasons and the rusted nails. Oh, there's another personification peak. So there's this description, all this imagery right here is describing sort of like the porch, the physical qualities of the porch. It's like usual porch stuff. Okay, there's nails poking out and it's splintered and, you know, the steps are sunken, all of that. Those are like normal porch things. Down here too, the things that are on the porch, father's boots, mother's sandals, people that are bringing, you know, leaflets on a Sunday. These are all being described here, and those are all normal things for a porch. That's the same stuff there. Usual things that we see on a porch. But then, right about the time when we said that there was a shift in this poem, for other reasons, right here, I'm noticing that there's a shift also in the imagery, because in the imagery now, we're taking the imagery from describing the porch to describing the speaker, right? I claim your corners, sit and gaze into the darkness, you breathe. You can picture the little boy sitting, looking under into the porch. So the imagery here also shifts at that same point. This is how you know that you're on a good track with your interpretation. If multiple things are piling up to point in a direction, then you know that you're on the right track. So if over here, when I looked at, where's my first page? When I looked at this one, I already noticed this shift. And, you know, okay, on a first reading, that makes sense. But when it's emphasized with another element, a third element indicating that this is a shift, then I have to listen to that. And now I have to keep asking myself, what's different about the top part of this poem than is about the bottom part of this poem? And that might lead me to meaning too. So in this case, the imagery describes the speaker. So the shift there from porch to speaker, right? And it's all about, the second part is all about, also this is, remember where that whole big sentence is, it's one big sentence in the ending part right here. And it's all about how he is looking underneath there, how the shadows are seeping underneath the porch, and the grass is changing, and then a whole bunch of dogs, a pack of strays. They have mange and they are haloed with fleas. That is a really cool image, because usually the dogs that have mange that are scarred and sitting like with their ribs hanging out underneath a house in the heat are usually not the most friendly or pleasant dogs, right? But here their fleas are a halo. That's a real oxymoron in a way, because a halo is supposed to be something beautiful and saintly, but it's made up of fleas. So there's a real dichotomy there between that. So this that's almost, I want to say that that's like looking at connotation, that word haloed. There's a connotative element there. Right? There's the idea that the dogs are holy in some way. I mean, who wears a halo? But then the halo is made of fleas, so that's kind of a real opposition there. I don't know. It's an interesting word choice there. It could have just said surrounded, right? Or covered with fleas. Haloed. All right, so we continue with the imagery of the speaker who is getting underneath the porch, right? He's comparing the way, I'll get to the metaphors in a minute, but he's talking about how he has to sometimes squeeze under there to get a ball because he's playing in the yard or whatever. And all the things that are in that space. He crawls into the space filled with broken pipes, shattered glass, toy trucks, mangled plastic bags. Mangled's another interesting connotative word, right? Shattered. The things underneath there are broken, like messed up, like useless. But also among them are the dogs that are haloed. All right. I was on imagery and I switched over to connotation. I get excited about poetry. All right, so here we have more imagery. This is describing the area underneath the porch. These creatures refers to the dogs. Well, dogs do go under the porch if they can to get out of the heat, or wherever they can, like whatever shade from a tree or what have you, to if they've been out all day, in the Texas heat. People even do that, right? They walk on the side of the street that's got the shadow more instead of the one that's in the sun. We do all those little tricks. All right, before I finish with step 2, I want to notice that there are 2 main metaphors in this poem. The first one is in the first part where he's still talking to the porch. And he says, "You're an altar for my father's work boots, for my mother's huaraches, for Sunday morning shadows armed with Spanish verses and pamphlets." So this is a metaphor. It's comparing the porch to an altar. So usually whenever I'm talking about or making notes on a metaphor, what I try to do is I will mark it metaphor, and then I will put like an equation, and I'll say, okay, well, the porch equals an altar. That's another weird thing to compare a porch to, because a porch is the normal, like, everyday thing, and an altar is something special and religious, right? It's kind of like a halo on a dog. And they're both religious things, right? So, oh, look at that. I can say, okay, down here I have the halo. There's a religious association there with this porch. It's almost like he's elevating the porch, taking it from its humble status as the thing that you walk on to get into the house and elevating it into something almost religious. So the function of this metaphor, elevation. We've all seen these dilapidated porches. We've walked on them, we've stepped on them, we've stood on them, we've left our shoes on them, right? We don't think about them as altars, but the poet here does. So there's got to be something special about this porch. There's something special about the dogs that are around it, even though they look really, you know, like normal yard dogs. There's another metaphor a little bit later on having to do with the dogs. Here on line 25, a pack of strays scarred with mange, haloed with fleas, begins squeezing between your fractured cinder blocks the way I squeeze when a ball wanders off and I must squirm after it. So what's being compared there? It's another metaphor. Anybody? What's being compared in that metaphor?
Is it the dog and the person? The way
Yeah.
they squeeze?
Uh-huh. The dogs are equal to the speaker. They squeeze through because it's so hot out. They're just trying to get some relief into the shade, the same way he squeezes in when he goes looking after his toy. You know, it rolled underneath there. He's got to go get it. He's little probably in this memory, so, you know, little kids can get into places. And it leads into this description of what it's like underneath the porch. So they both crawl. I'll make a little note here. They both crawl into the porch like to get something. The dogs are getting relief from the blazing sun and the heat, and the speaker is getting his toy, his ball that went under there. All right, so I already mentioned that. I just forgot to make a note about the damaged things that are under there. Okay, so the figurative part of it has brought me a little closer to understanding structure, because I realized that there's a lot more personification at the beginning of the poem than there is at the end. And also that the metaphors started to make me think about, and the connotation that's used here, this is actually a metaphor now that I think about it, because the dogs are being compared to angels, right? That's what we call an indirect metaphor. Because they have halos, they're being compared to angels. So I'm definitely noticing on the second reading that there is like a not a conflict, but a dichotomy is the word, but it's sort of like a balance between the ordinary and the holy. I know that that's a good interpretation because I can see it in multiple places. If I just come up with something and it's only in one place and it doesn't take into consideration the rest of the poem, then it's a shaky interpretation. But if I can see that that idea of the ordinary, like the porch, how it's falling down and it's unsteady and all that stuff from the weather, if I can see how that is balanced with things that are holy or special or, you know, in some way elevated, then I can see that a couple different places, right? And that helps me to understand that my interpretation might be going in a good direction. All right, so let me wrap this up. The third thing I want to do is get to meaning. I'm not going to read the poem again, but you would if you were going to. So meaning. All right, what are some topics in this poem? I had that before. Where's my list of topics? I put that on my first reading over here. Porch. Well, I think it's about a porch, but I think it's about more than a porch. So I don't want to try to say the whole poem is about a porch literally, because it's probably not. Praise, well, we know that from odes, so that's a possibility, right? He is praising the porch. What else? What's another topic that we see in this poem? Anybody? Are you bored to death? I told you it would be long, but I feel like the more I do with it, the easier it will be for you when you're doing your new poem. Any other topics?
Would comfort be one?
Comfort, for sure. Because we were talking about how the dogs go up under the porch. He goes up under the porch to get something, right? Yeah, comfort. They're sheltered there underneath the porch. And they didn't have any other place to go, so they're being protected, right? It makes me think of refugees almost. Maybe it'd be too far to make that assumption with the porch, but in a really, really metaphor situation, it's almost like the porch is run down, but it's still protecting others, right? Like it's a refuge for others, refuge, a place of comfort, protection. Even though, well, see, now I'm getting away from topics and I'm starting to already come up with an idea, right? Hello. Okay. Even though it's like imperfect. The porch is falling down and porous and splintered and common. So I could ask myself, what is the poet trying to say about comfort through this porch? What is this poet trying to say about refuge and protection through this porch? Maybe, let me try to make a sentence. Lesson about life. Usually I like to start them with we because then that gets to the human experience. We can take comfort, trying to use that idea that you came up with, in common imperfect things. That's totally true. I mean, think about the face of your grandmother or your grandfather or your uncle or your parents, right? Like they don't have perfect model faces, but you don't care because it's your grandma, it's your mom, it's your dad. There's more to it than that. And they might have a normal sort of face, right? There's not anything extraordinary about it, except it's extraordinary to you because of the comfort that you gain from those people in your life, right? And the looks that they give you to help you cope through life. So is it true for human beings that we can take comfort in common imperfect things? Yeah. Does that happen in the poem? Yeah. So I'm onto something here. I don't think that's it though. I mean, I think that there's more to it. I think in that way, maybe a period, through this, I hate doing this on the spot. The ordinary can become like holy or extraordinary. Don't you have that one stuffed animal or that one piece of clothing that reminds you of a person or a time or an event, right? And that thing might be completely like the eyes torn off of that stuffed animal, or you know, the piece of clothing is frayed at the collar or whatever, but we don't care because it's got a significance beyond that that gives us comfort. That's the idea here, right? And so the porch is an example of that. So are there other poetic ideas or like themes that we could come up with? Sure, if we didn't come up with the word comfort, we could have gone in a different direction. There are multiple things to be learned from a poem. These are layered expressions like we've been talking about, right? So I'm not saying that when you do your analysis, you have to come up with the same thing that I came up with at the end. That would be a mind reading exercise. What you need to do in a 1, 2, 3 analysis is try to get to a good interpretation or meaning or idea from the poem. It might not be the only one, it probably isn't, but you need to get to something. Now, what if this was a thesis statement in an essay? What if I asked you to write an analysis essay on this poem? Well, this is the thesis. Because if I say, Ode to a Texas Porch by Esteban Rodriguez is about how we can take comfort in common imperfect things and how through that, the ordinary can become extraordinary. Then the rest of my paper is about proving that, and I can go back to my notes to help me explain that. So that's why it's important to get to the theme, because otherwise you're just writing about random devices that are happening in the poem with no connection. Does that make sense? I know this is a lot, but I wanted to go through it in depth so that you could kind of see what's possible with a poem, and especially with the poem that you're going to do for your homework. So does that make sense? Hopefully. I know there was a long way around it, but sometimes you just have to roll up your sleeves and wallow around in a poem in order to get the ideas and try to play around with it. And I'm hoping that you're seeing that there was a lot more to this poem than you originally saw the first time that you read it. And that's, you know, why I teach literature, so that we can, you know, kind of wallow around in those things together. So if this seems super hard, that's okay. We're going to practice. If it seems super cool, then that's okay. We're going to do more of it. If it seems like impossible, then you need to spend some time with me and I'll help you with your homework, right? Like if over the next couple of days you're working on this week's poem and you are confused or you need help, then, you know, just message me and I'll do some explaining for you. All right. Okay, so right here where we have the assignment, what I want you to do is take this poem, The Inheritance. I'm going to read it for you right now because it's good to hear poems out loud. And then your homework is to do a 1, 2, 3 analysis on it, just like I did with this porch poem. So this is The Inheritance by Kelvin B. Parker. Some inherit wealth. Some inherit an entitlement to a lavish estate with a gated driveway and surrounded by gorgeous green landscape. Some inherit access to a trust fund. Birth is a coronation for a life of privilege, entry to a back door for opportunities accrued from 400 years of using lives for cheap labor. Some inherit generational pain, an endowment immediately set up after birth, with emotional trauma dispersed over the course of their childhood, and a lump sum of struggles paid once they reach the age of maturity. Some inherit a subhuman status. Instead of being treated as people, they are called gorilla and ape. Some inherit bruises on the soul, passed down from one generation to the next like a sacred language. Birth is an inauguration to a lifetime of economic challenges and unjust impoverishment, like filling used plastic jugs with water taken from a gas station spigot and then boiling it just to bathe. The pursuit of happiness is a constant struggle for survival. The quest for the American dream is unwillingly diverted to a tiresome scavenger hunt for equality. Some inherit ancestral burdens and are heirs to indignities. Instead of being left assets, they are left beneficiaries of refurbished identities, stripped from a tribal connection. Instead of being left property, they are in line of succession to acquire a fragmented citizenship in a country that once classified them as property. Some inherit the misfortune of being born free, but die fighting for their lives to matter. Okay, so that is your challenge for this week. Your job is to do a 1, 2, 3 analysis. I'm going to post this whole video to the YouTube playlist as usual, but then I'm going to excerpt the part where I was doing the 1, 2, 3 analysis as a separate video and post it here, just in case it helps you with reference to go back while we were doing that porch one. Okay? Any questions on this week? When I sign off, I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that quiz is open. So if you wanted to go do it, I would highly recommend studying a little bit, looking over the book and the notes and things like that beforehand, before running to do that, so that you can put forth your best effort. I don't think there's going to be a third re-quiz. That's excessive. All right. Questions? I know we went a little long today. I apologize for that, but I wanted to do that example and hopefully that it's helpful. All right, that's it for today. I hope you all have a good week. I hope you enjoy the cooler weather later on, if it happens, hopefully. All right, see you on Monday. Our next class is on
Bye,
Monday.
Miss. Have a good day.
Bye. You too.